Hello, and welcome to Tales from the Mennonite Heritage Archives, a show about people, places, and events from Mennonite history. Thanks for tuning in. I'm your host, Dan Dick. In special storage cases in the vault at the Mennonite Heritage Archives are reels of microfilm containing information that is more than 200 years old. Since the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, historians have been anxious about acquiring access to historical records in Ukrainian-held archives. Under the Soviets, these archives were heavily restricted. When the Soviet Union collapsed, some researchers from the West were granted access, but the possibility of authorities again restricting the records remained a constant threat. This treasure trove of Mennonite-related materials was selected for a cooperative microfilming project. In 1998, North American Mennonite Archives and the Odessa Region State Archive collaborated to microfilm these historic documents. Microfilms from the Guardianship Committee for Foreign Settlers in Southern Russia began arriving in North America in 2000. Many of these microfilms are stored at the Mennonite Heritage Archives in Winnipeg. The microfilms contain over 100,000 pages of records about Mennonites spanning the years 1799 to 1877. Though there are some gaps in the information, the documents contain detailed information related to farming practices, politics, industry, judicial proceedings, education, religious concerns, and more. The documents were microfilmed over a period of 10 years from 2000 to 2010. Throughout these years, there was considerable urgency to complete the project because access could have been cut off at any time. Those fears are now a reality due to the Russia-Ukraine war. What's more, historians worry that many records will have been destroyed. Among the documents on the microfilms are immunization records. The documents record names, dates, and locations of Mennonite adults and children who were vaccinated for smallpox in the Khortytsa colony in Russia in 1809 and 1814. The vaccination data reveals some interesting information about the vaccine recipients in Khortytsa. I'll dig into that a bit later. First, some background. Now, this story has a lot of characters and takes quite a few twists and turns, so stick with me as we unravel it. The deadly smallpox virus is believed to have been around for at least 3,000 years. Scientists have found what look like traces of the telltale smallpox pustules on Egyptian mummies. Historically, it killed about 30% of its victims. Now, let's speed up the calendar to 1762. That's when Catherine the Great, a woman descending from German nobility, became Empress of Russia through her marriage to Peter III of Russia. Catherine, a champion of science, saw firsthand how smallpox was decimating her subjects. The disease struck royalty and peasantry alike. Before he became emperor, Catherine's husband was infected with smallpox. He survived, but was left with facial and bodily scars for the rest of his life. Catherine heard about the work of a British doctor named Thomas Dimsdale. Dr. Dimsdale discovered that deliberately infecting a patient with a small dose of the live smallpox virus gave protection against the disease. The live virus was introduced via a small cut or wound on the skin of the recipient. This inoculation method is called variolation. Catherine learned that Dr. Dimsdale had used variolation to successfully inoculate the British royal family against smallpox. Dr. Dimsdale's success prompted Catherine to invite him to Russia. Initially, he wasn't interested, so the Empress sent a follow-up invitation along with an offer of money. In 1768, he traveled to St. Petersburg to inoculate the Empress. Now, Catherine knew that Russian citizens might not willingly be inoculated, so she volunteered to be a test subject and hopefully prove the procedure to be safe. Catherine feared that Dr. Dimsdale would come to harm should her vaccination attempt fail. In the event of her death, she arranged for a relay of fast horses to speed the doctor out of the country. Much to his relief, Dimsdale's inoculation of the Empress proved successful. She subsequently spent decades rolling out an inoculation campaign among her subjects. Over the next 30 years, 2 million people in Russia were inoculated against smallpox. Mennonites get involved in this story around 1786. That's when Catherine the Great invited them to settle and farm land in South Russia. The newly arrived Mennonites from Prussia were also at risk of smallpox infections. They looked to Catherine the Great, their benefactor, for help to fight outbreaks. I'll come back to this thread in our story in a few minutes. By 1796, another British physician, Dr. Edward Jenner, published his work in developing an injectable vaccine from the cowpox variant of the disease. He observed that milkmaids who had previously caught cowpox from dairy cows did not catch smallpox. Jenner's vaccine is credited with making possible the first large-scale vaccination campaigns. But he was not the first or the only person to discover that exposure to cowpox immunized people. Before Jenner, there were at least 6 other individuals who discovered the connection between cowpox and smallpox. But the only one to recognize the wider importance of the discovery was a certain Peter Plett. Peter Plett, a teacher, was born in Denmark in 1766. Plett worked as a home tutor in Germany, where he apparently learned from milkmaids that exposure to cowpox protected humans from the much more serious smallpox illness. In 1791, Plett moved to an estate, where he successfully tested the theory on the estate owner's children. Plett reported his success to the medical faculty of the University of Kiel in Germany, but they favored the variolation method and didn't act on his reports. Plett's work occurred 5 years before Jenner made the same discovery and became world famous. Now, Plett's surname suggests Mennonite heritage, but he has no known connection to Mennonites. Perhaps some genealogical researchers listening might be interested in some follow-up research on Plett. While we cannot assume a Mennonite connection to Peter Plett, there is a documented case of another Mennonite with a connection to our story. In the early 1800s in the Netherlands, smallpox was wreaking havoc. King Ludwig Napoleon, ruler of Holland, issued a decree for a vaccination campaign in 1808. Despite the high fatality rate of smallpox, some populations resisted vaccination. Public health authorities asked a Mennonite preacher in Haarlem for help in their information campaign. Adrian Lustius wrote a simple booklet for primary education. Lustius advised that medical protection against a dangerous disease was made possible by the goodness of God. He wrote that those who rejected vaccination were deemed ungrateful to God and lacked good citizenship. Around the same time, Mennonites in the Khortytsa colony in Russia were asking officials for help to vaccinate their communities. In 1801, the number of deaths in the village of Khortytsa was twice as high as the number of births due to a fever epidemic. Reports from the era indicate that Khortytsa Mennonites not only begged the government for vaccines, they also wanted instructions on how to administer the vaccine. By 1805, Khortytsa Mennonites were vaccinating their people against smallpox. By 1808, vaccines were being administered to Mennonites in the Molochna colony villages along the Molochna River. Records show that by 1809, 393 children from 205 Mennonite families, mostly under 6 years of age, were vaccinated for smallpox. As was the case in Amsterdam, some Mennonites resisted vaccination. Again, local health officials conducted an information and education campaign, and officials trained colonists how to inoculate their people. Later records show that by the end of 1817, 197 of 311 children had been vaccinated. 12 unvaccinated children died, and 102 children remained unvaccinated. One source suggests that an inadequate vaccine uptake was not due to people's reluctance. Rather, the vaccine could not be produced fast enough to meet demand. when Mennonites migrated to North America in large groups in the 1870s, 350 migrants sick with smallpox were forced to quarantine in Britain. 5 Mennonite children there died of smallpox in 1875. As newly arrived Mennonites took up homesteads in southern Manitoba, smallpox outbreaks continued. Gretna, a Manitoba village at the Canada-USA border, was affected by several outbreaks. In 1883, Manitoba officials placed quarantine officers at the border in response to an outbreak in the neighboring state of North Dakota. The restrictions prevented Mennonites from accessing a sawmill on the Pembina River until the outbreak was brought under control. 2 locals, Peter Preece and Cornelius Wiebe, looked after the vaccinations. In 1882, the international border was again shut down due to smallpox. This time the outbreak was in Manitoba. Carpenters built 6 shanties on the outskirts of Gretna to house the sick. Despite these containment efforts, the disease spread to 2 neighboring villages. 3 days into the outbreak, all of Gretna was put under quarantine, and guards camped on the outskirts of town. With a shortage of medical help, the situation became desperate. A doctor from Nietzsche, North Dakota, just south of Gretna, took charge and reported that some patients were wandering around in delirium unrestrained. The home of the men accused of bringing the pox into Gretna was fumigated with sulfur and recommended to be burned, along with all its contents. Health authorities wanted Gretna residents to be vaccinated, but many people were reportedly apathetic about vaccination. In North Dakota, the governor announced a quarantine. Trains were stopped at the border. Armed guards protected postal carriers as they exchanged mail at the boundary. Newspapers reported that some trains still ran. In response, authorities in North Dakota tore up a stretch of railroad tracks. Manitoba's premier felt North Dakota was overreacting. The governor lifted the quarantine after 10 days as the outbreak waned. 10 people were known to have fallen ill in Manitoba, and at least 4 died. Another outbreak in Gretna in 1927 forced the school to close for 2 days. Now, let's get back to our microfilmed immunization records of Mennonites in Khortytsa. The 1814 records includes the names of vaccine recipients, their father's name if they were children, and their home village. In some cases, multiple children from one family were vaccinated. In families where the father had died, the parent is listed as, for example, Widow Friesen or Widow Preece. One might speculate their husbands died of smallpox, but the immunization records do not contain such information. In addition to the immunization records, the microfilms also reference letters from Russian authorities to Mennonite colonists and identify reports of increased incidence of smallpox in certain regions of Russia. There is still much more to learn from these microfilm records, but many of the documents still require translation from their original Russian and German languages. The Mennonite Heritage Archives holds many kinds of records and stories about these and other ailments that affected Mennonites. To learn more, to listen to this episode again, or see immunization records referenced in this episode, visit mharchives.ca. If you have questions or comments about this program, email us at info@mharchives.ca.
I'm Archivist Conrad Stace. This program is made possible through support from Golden West Radio and listeners like you. If you want to support this program and the work of the archives, you can find out how to do that on our website at mharchives.ca and click on support.
We'll be back next week with another story about people, places, and events in Mennonite history. The research for this episode came from more than 15 different sources, and that's just too many to name here, so I'll simply offer a big quilted blanket thank you to all the researchers, writers, journalists, and historians who contributed to this episode. Thanks also to the Tales team of Graham Unruh, Kaylee Dick, and Conrad Stace, who work on the program. I'm your host, Dan Dick. Tales from the Mennonite Heritage Archives will be back next week with more stories about people, places, and events from Mennonite history. Thanks for listening.